A little while ago, I did a couple episodes on OmniAuth, which is a really cool way to integrate third-party authentication services into your Rails application, such as Twitter or Facebook. Now, the scenario I presented this in was a little bit complex because I was integrating OmniAuth into an existing username and password system, in this case Devise. I was also handling and supporting multiple authentications per user. Now, if you don't need those two requirements, then your authentication can be a lot more simpler with OmniAuth, and that's what I want to demonstrate here. So here I have a simple blogging application, and I currently don't have any type of authentication at all in this app, and I want to add some. And to do this, I'm just going to add it using only OmniAuth. I'm not going to use AuthLogic or Devise or any other type of authentication, because I want to show you just how simple it really is. So the first step is to go to our gem file and add the OmniAuth gem inside of here, and make sure to run the bundle command to get it installed. Next, we need to add an initializer to load OmniAuth. I'm just going to call it omniauth.rb. I'll just paste in the configuration code into here, and notice that we're adding OmniAuth as middleware into our application. So OmniAuth is pretty much just rack middleware, which is really awesome because it stays decoupled from the rest of our application, so we can really implement our authentication however we want. And notice I'm going to just have one provider here, Twitter, and you'll make sure you want to supply your consumer key and secret that you get when you sign up with Twitter. And you can get that at dev.twitter.com. Just register your app there and it'll give you the keys. So with that all set up, we can now get started in adding some authentication. So you can see here I have this to-do line where I need to add the authentication in my layout file. And really all I want here is just a link to say sign in with Twitter. And then that will go to the OmniAuth Twitter URL, which is in this case auth/Twitter in my application. So now when we go to our application after we restart it, you can see that there's now a sign in with Twitter link. And when we click it, it takes us to Twitter and asks us if we want to allow access. Click allow, and it'll redirect us back to our application. Now notice we get a routing error because this is the callback URL that OmniAuth triggers after it successfully authenticates. So we have to respond to this in our routes. So if we go to our routes file, we can add a route to respond to this. So we can just say match, and then that URL. And let's take it to, we have to create a new controller for this. Let's call it sessions controller create action. And notice this is just specifically for Twitter. So if we want to provide supply different providers, then we could just pass in a variable here so that we can support different ones. So we'll need to generate a new controller for this called sessions. And in this controller we need a create action. And inside of here we have an environment variable called omniauth.auth, which has a hash of information about our authentication. So if you want to see what's in here, just raise it, let's say to YAML so that it looks pretty. So now when we click sign in with Twitter, it'll take us through the authentication, and now it takes us into our sessions controller where we're raising that environment variable, and you can see all the details that is sending us about our Twitter authentication. So that means we can use the information inside this hash to either sign in an existing user or create a new user if he doesn't have an account already. However, we currently don't have a user model, so we'll need to generate one. So let's create a new model called user, and it's important that it has these two columns, provider and UID. And you can name them whatever you want, but any other columns you want after this is just sort of information that just goes along with the user, and we'll just pass in a name that'll be fetched from the OmniAuth hash. And we'll also need to migrate the database. Okay, so now that we have a user model, we can work our authentication magic inside our sessions controller. So we have that OmniAuth hash, which has all of our information about the authentication. And so what we want to do is either fetch the user and see if it exists. So we can say user.find by provider and UID. Those are the first two columns we made, and that'll be auth provider and auth UID. And then if he doesn't exist, this will return nil. So if he doesn't exist, we're just going to create a new user, and let's just call a class method that I'm going to make called create by or with OmniAuth. And we'll just pass in the auth hash into there. So this way, we're going to get a user whether fetching it or creating it through that hash. So inside our user model, let me create that class method before I forget. It's called create with OmniAuth, and we get our auth hash inside of there. And by the way, if you call create and then pass a block to it, you can have access to the instance before it actually saves it to the database, which is really useful just for setting attributes in a clean way because it returns the user afterwards. So here we can just say the provider is the auth provider, and the UID is the auth UID, and the name is just under auth user info name. And that's it. Okay, so back to our controller. Now that we have a user, we can sign him in by just storing his user ID in a session. So we'll just say user ID, put it in there. And then we just want to redirect back to our root URL with a notice saying signed in. And that's it. So now when we click the sign in with Twitter link, it'll just handle the sign in process all behind the scenes. And now it says signed in. It's pretty awesome. One thing we need to change here, though, is that it still says sign in with Twitter. Instead, we want to display the current user's name and then maybe a logout link. So this means we need some way to access the user which is currently logged in. And to do that, I'm going to make a method inside of our application controller. Let's just call it current user. And we'll just do a find for the user with that session ID, if that session exists. And I'm actually going to store this in an instance variable so that it caches it. And let's make this a helper method so that it's available for the views as well. So this means inside of our layout file, we can change the behavior of the sign-in link so that it only shows when the user is currently not logged in. So we can add an if-else statement to say, if we have a current user, then we want to just say welcome with the current user's name. Otherwise, we're just going to display the sign-in link. So now when we reload our page here, it says welcome Ryan Bates because that's the user I'm currently logged in through Twitter. It would be nice if we had a sign out link here too. So let's just add a new link here called sign out. And then it'll just go to a sign out path, which I currently don't have yet. So we'll need to add this sign out route to our routes file. So let's say /signout goes to our sessions controller. We'll make a destroy action for this. And then we'll say as sign out so that it has that sign out path that we used. So inside of our sessions controller, we can make this destroy action. And really it'll do the exact same thing as here, except it will set user ID to nil and just say signed out. And that's it. Pretty simple. So now when we reload our page here, we now have a sign out link. Click it. We're now signed out. We can sign in through Twitter. Click it. It goes through Twitter, does all the communication in the background, and now signs us in. So that's really simple authentication with OmniAuth. And because we are using OmniAuth, it's extremely simple to offer other providers as well. So we can just copy and paste this Twitter link and just change it to Facebook. And then magically, as long as you add the right credentials to your Initializer file, it'll just support Facebook authentication as well. You don't really have to do anything extra. You can add OpenID and pretty much anything else that OmniAuth supports. So if you don't need a traditional username and password authentication, and you don't need to support multiple types of authentication per account, you can see that this solution works really well and it's very simple to add to any application, and it doesn't require any additional plugins besides OmniAuth.